Hello and welcome to This Date in History, aka TDH. This show is all about the events that occurred today in years past, both recognized by actual historians, but mainly things I personally find intriguing enough for me to bring to you. The source of this information comes from the smart device application Today in History on this day. For links to the app, music, and anything else potentially interesting, check the box below. Anyway, on with the show! Today is Freya's Day, aka Friday, December 10th, 2021. Kicking it off in 1317, Vladimir, Duke of Finland, and Erik, Duke of Södermanland, the two brothers of Sweden's King Birger, were seized during the Nyköping banquet, later to be starved to death in the dungeon of Nyköping Castle. Moving on up a few hundred years, in 1652, the Commonwealth of England was forced to reform its navy after their defeat at the Battle of Dungeness, which took place near the Cape of Dungeness in Kent during the First Anglo-Dutch War. Not too long after that, in 1665, founded by Michiel de Ruyter, the Royal Netherlands Marine Corps was founded as Regiment de Marine. Today, it is 2,300 fighters strong and works with the allies of their home on missions worldwide. A couple decades after that, in 1684, contained in the paper De Motu Corporum Integrum, Isaac Newton's derivation of Kepler's laws from his theory of gravity was read to the Royal Society by Edmund Halley. In 1768, the first edition of the Encyclopædia Britannica was published and continues to this day. As of 2008, 4,411 named contributors have aided in the continuation and evolution of the written word for the English language within these tomes alone. In 1799, the meter was officially adopted as the unit of length in France, eventually to make it part of the global majority, with only 3 countries out of the 195 today not using it. The UK seems to be the only one officially using both. Moving up to the next century, in 1817, becoming the 20th, Mississippi joined the United States, and today is home to nearly 3 million people. Fun fact about many states, most of them were created to either get a leg up or balance out the political fight over human rights and slavery leading up to the Civil War. Speaking of that conflict, in 1861, Kentucky, a rival state government to the Confederate States of America, declared themselves to be the 13th state in the Confederacy, which was accepted by the rebels. 3 years later, in 1864, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman's Union Army troops reached the outer Confederate defenses of Savannah, Georgia, during Sherman's march to the sea. In 1877, after a 5-month-long siege of the city of Plevna during the Russo-Turkish War, the 25,000 surviving Turks surrendered, making a decisive victory for the Russian army and resulting with the liberation of Bulgaria. A few decades after that, in 1898, the Spanish-American War was ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which also granted Cuba its independence from Spain and gave the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam to the United States. Roughly 30 years after that, give or take, in 1932, Thailand became a constitutional monarchy, which still rules today over its nearly 70 million residents. With its capital of Bangkok, it's not surprising a frightening amount of them have both sets of plumbing. Moving up into World War II in 1942, Radziński's note, the first official report on the Holocaust, was sent by Poland's government in exile to 26 other countries' administrations, all of whom signed the declaration by United Nations, which was signed by an additional 21 more governments during the conflict. Ultimately, this union became known as the Allies. A few years after that, in 1949, the President of the Republic of China, Chiang Kai-shek, and his government were forced to retreat to Taiwan when Chengdu, the last Kuomintang-held city in mainland China, was besieged by the People's Liberation Army, what would later become the CCP. In 1963, gaining independence from the United Kingdom, Zanzibar became a constitutional monarchy under the authority of Sultan Jamshid bin Abdullah. 5 years later, in 1968, the 300 million yen robbery, equivalent to $2,644,395 US today, the largest heist in Japan's history and still to be solved, was carried out in Tokyo. In 1983, Argentina saw democracy once again with the inauguration of President Raúl Alfonsín. 1 year after that, in 1984, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, an international human rights treaty, was recognized by the United Nations General Assembly. Pretty odd for that to come out that year, especially with how things are going today. A little bit after that, in 1989, Sakhigayin Elbidorj announced the establishment of the Mongolian Democratic Union at the country's first open pro-democracy public demonstration. 4 years later, in 1993, having been in operation since the Middle Ages, the County Durham coalfield, situated in Sunderland, saw Wearmouth Colliery, its last pit, closed after that itself had been in operation for 156 years. And in 1996, Nelson Mandela, after having suffered years of horror from apartheid, promulgated the new Constitution of South Africa. First, Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet, 1787, Ada Lovelace, 1815, Emily Dickinson, 1830, Melville Dewey, 1851, Michael Clark Duncan, 1957, Bobby Flay, 1964, Greg Giraldo, 1965. Deaths: Alfred Nobel, 1896, Horace Elgin Dodge, 1920, Franjo Chudman, 1999. And that concludes the show. Once again, check the underbar for any links you may be interested in. For your dose of Pacifist Daily, I am Aoxander, and you are you. Toodles!